Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Magicians, as well as the latest episode of The 100. Like always, if I'm talking about something you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include a time of me talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you want to hear what I have to say about The Magicians, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of The 100. But the first thing we're going to talk about is this week's episode of The Magicians. Obviously, this is the aftermath of last week's episode. Quentin got hurt, so basically he went through a lot of surgeries. He's basically been out for the past 3 weeks. They ended up replacing, like, the part of his arm that got hurt. They replaced it with, like, wood. At the same time, Alice got buried, and then you have Margot and Elliot kind of trying to deal with the whole royalty situation. I mean, it's a situation. It's kind of a big theme in this episode of like having to grow up. Obviously, they've lived this very party lifestyle, and it's just it's a little too much for Elliot because it's just like I don't know how to be a king. But the fact is, with the whole situation, I can't actually run away from this. I'm kind of stuck in this situation. So Margot decides to help him out. Basically, the plan is to kind of do the whole doppelganger golem type of thing from last season that kind of happened to her, basically implant Elliot's mind into it, and that way is like it could stay back here in Fillory while he goes back to Breaksville. Back to Earth. But it's a situation, because what I find very interesting about Elliot's situation in the story is obviously he goes back home, but nothing's the same because he wouldn't be back home and everything because he finally gets to breathe in that earth air again and just kind of return to his home. But there he finds his home is taken over by Todd because Todd has become the new him. And it's like, don't be honest with me, Todd. Are you wearing my vest? And he's like, yeah, I'm wearing your vest. Just fucking keep it. It's like, okay, how about I just stay here and spend the rest of my life trying to screw over Todd for basically becoming the new me, kind of reclaim his throne here on Earth. Obviously, it's a big deflection from everything that he had to deal with back in Fillory, because it's just he's in a very complicated situation because life is always advancing. He's already kind of taken on this huge responsibility of being High King of Fillory. Like a whole world's fate is decided by him, and it's like, why me? Like it's just why do things have to play out this way? Because even him and Henry are talking later on, and it's like, which I love that whole conversation. Henry's like, okay, so the beast took a shit in the spring well. It's like, no. Ember took a shit in the spring well. Which, once again, I'm getting that shit confused. I'm going to tell you, it happens every fucking episode. Okay, is the one that shit in the well, is that Ember? Is Ember alive or is it Umber? I thought Umber, or I think I'm mishearing it so often. I'm legitimately confused. It's Ember, but I swore last episode it was Umber. I don't know anymore because names are so similar that maybe because I have terrible hearing or just terrible memory, obviously the combination of the two, I can't remember that. So I heard Ember, so I'm going with that this time. I'll probably end up changing it again next week, but who cares? Nevertheless, it's like, oh, he's shitting well. And Henry's like, oh, it's just, okay, so that's what's messing up magic, because he's talking about the fact that he tried to use magic. It's a little wonky. Even he talked to another teacher, and she was like, oh, magic's a little wonky. So it's a circumstance where it's like, well, it's funny how things can be so, a combination of comedy and tragedy can all be mixed together in one damn sentence like that. And he talks about the fact is that, like, it's a lot for Elliot to be, it's part of growing up. The fact is that they find themselves in this situation that he's actually surprised. Like, it's like, how am I supposed to help you? You're a king. I don't know anything about ruling the damn world. I barely know what to do about this whole school situation. A couple of my students went off and conquered another world, and then Elliot's like, well, didn't necessarily conquer it. More so than anything, it's like they actually kind of gave it to us. They legitimately didn't even have to work hard to start ruling a world. It was just pretty easy, especially for Alice and Quentin and Margot to become like kings and queens themselves. I was like, that was next to nothing. So it was very effortless. But his whole world back home, it means nothing now. Not necessarily it means nothing, but it doesn't change the fact is that what's happening in Fillory and that he's the only one that can really help them because he's the only real, he's the High King. He's been chosen. He may not be the most fit for the job, but it's still his responsibility to help with that world. And he has to kind of take that seriously. But it's like, because for him, Henry was like, why did you even go to Fillory in the first place? Like, what did you think was going to happen? He thought he was going to die. He was kind of hoping that's why he was so keen on being like, yeah, take me with you, because he was so distraught about the whole Mike situation that he just wanted to die. He wanted to just he felt like it was the easiest way. Like, he didn't go there for some grand goal of like, oh, we're going to save the day, save the world. It's like, no, he went there to die. Which, to be fair, To be fair, technically he did until Alice brought him and Margot back to life. On top of all that, dude, it's like the whole Alice situation too. It's a lot to handle. It's like life got serious all of a sudden. Life was kind of a party for them before, especially at the beginning of the last season. But now it's a circumstance of like they have to grow up. They kind of have to accept this new responsibility, especially in Elliot's case, which I was really interested when that whole situation. Like for one, his wife and Fillory Finn, like being so like, you're so good. I know like I'm not your type and everything, but she's like, I know like you're so good at sex and you're so big, and it's like, I don't know how to politely say this, Elliot, but could you F me now? And it's like, wait, what? It kind of throws you for a loop, because it's just like she enjoys Elliot's quote unquote company. That's me trying to put it in a very elegant way. Like I could have really gone all out with that, but it's like I'm trying to, like, legitimately in the back of my mind, I'm like trying to calm down my filthy mouth when it comes to certain things. Like, I don't have 100% of a filthy mouth, but I feel like I should trail it a little bit back, especially with a show like this with cusses up a storm. They're dropping cuss words like every like couple seconds, which I appreciate, because it's like, to me, that's like the realism behind, it's like they're a bunch of teenagers. Of course they wouldn't be all proper about it. They're a bunch of teenagers that have magic, and they're at a like, well, not teenager / late teenagers to young adults. I should just label them as young adults with magic and their royalty. So it's kind of like, of course, It's definitely going to be interesting seeing how that goes forward, because Margot kind of had like a reality smack, because the whole conversation happened between her and Julia, about the whole circumstance. She's like, oh, Alice is dead because of you. Quentin's severely hurt, all because of you and your whole situation. And she explains, it's like, that's not my fault. If you guys had owned, but it's like, she's so focused on her own situation, she didn't even pause to be like, oh my God, Quentin, what happened? Oh, Alice, I'm so sorry. The first thing she was saying is like, if you hadn't if you hadn't gotten my way, both of them would be dead, which is something I brought up last episode, that I'm like, maybe at the end of it all, it seems like that was Julia's plan. Now, the fact that she said that, it does seem like her plan was, even if it probably cost her life, because obviously all she cared about was killing Renard, but so once that was done, like, she probably didn't care whether she lived or died. Maybe she did, but I was thinking, like, even if she had to sacrifice her, she would have killed the beast for the greater good, essentially, but it was just, because she knows she couldn't trust the beast. But, or maybe it was a situation where she knew she'd be able to kill him afterwards without having to really, maybe she found a loophole around it herself. But it does seem like she was going to kill the beast afterwards too, so. Like I said, it was a situation where it's just like, I mean, they're both very evil people that needed to be kind of dealt with, so it's just a sucky situation that it had to come down to that. But Julia went as far as being like, Margot doesn't actually have any friends, because most people are only around her because they fear her. Obviously, I believe Elliot's really legitimately her friend. She's the only person he's ever really opened up to about the whole. Well, I mean, he didn't like willingly give the information out about him being a farmer, because it was basically during the whole that aspect of the trials that Quentin, Alice, Penny, and Katie had to go through last season, where it's like, oh, you tie your hands and you have to tell the truth. That's how that got revealed. So it wasn't necessarily that he wanted to. So, but still, even if they had that little dysfunctional, weird relationship they're still best friends. So, but it's still kind of a situation where it's like, even Alice and Quentin, she's kind of like, oh, they aren't your friends, which I think legitimately they are. But it's kind of something that kind of made Margot kind of wake up, to make her kind of realize it's not just Elliot that kind of has to do some growing up. Even she wrote about the fact that, oh, we have to grow up. And it's like, I think that kind of put her in perspective, be like, yeah, she needs to grow up too, that she needs to change. She can't be kind of the mean girl that she's always been, which it seemed like to me last season, it seemed like she was slowly changing that, especially as she spent more time with Quentin talking to him and everything. It did seem like she was legitimately being his friend, and I think legitimately Quentin thinks of her as a friend, because that was the whole thing, like at the beginning of the season, being like, hey, let's move past all the awkwardness of me, you, and Elliot having a threesome, and let's just be friends, so. Because Margot was like, yeah, we should build that statue for Alice. Obviously, at the beginning, she shut it down, because like, we can't be wasting all that money doing that. But it's like, we should do that. It's like, but we aren't her friends. It's like, yeah, but we should do it because we weren't. It's like, I think legitimately you were Alice's friends, even though you were just a bunch of weirdos that, like I said, a relationship with Elliot and Margot is very weird. But I think in some shape or form, it really was a friendship. They were kind of there for each other, and in its own way, it was a friendship. Because really, Alice didn't really have any friends outside of that group, so. I mean, that was something that Quentin kind of had to deal with in this episode. And obviously, Penny found out the whole situation, and he wanted to. Obviously, he came back, and he was just kind of like trying to be like, "Yeah, I miss her too." And it's like Quentin's like, "You didn't really know her." It's like, "Yeah, you slept together and stuff like that." But even then, it did seem like Penny did have some feelings for her. Obviously, like he considered her a friend. He was like, "Yo, I know we're weird. It's weird and everything. We slept together. It's a little awkward and everything." But it's like we can still be friends, like at the very least, you know? Because it's like I care about you and everything. So it's like Penny, even if it wasn't like romantic, he still had feelings for her in the sense of like he liked her and he cared for her. So her being dead, you know, because Penny wasn't there to help out because, you know, he was dealing with the whole Julia situation. So she kind of fucked him on that. So like that's what I mean. Like it didn't seem like Julia was that remorseful, especially with the whole situation with Morena, especially even more so when we found out this episode, oh, she actually froze Morena's body because Morena had left a message on her arm that was basically like, oh, there's a spell book. You need to go find it. And it turns out that spell book is kind of like a necromancy thing. That was kind of no reason why she was in break pills in the first place and everything. So this whole situation brought her and Katie back, which I'm glad to see Katie because I was curious, like, where are you? What they're going to do with you? Like, the last time we saw her was after what happened when Reynard showed up and Katie disappeared. Basically, Katie's been helping out, but basically she's been getting high this entire time. Her way of trying to forget everything. At first, she was like, oh, just she felt bad, not because she didn't never come back to help. You know, Julia, and Julia's like, no, it's okay because if you had come back, you would have just been either killed or, you know, in probably Julia's mind, much worse, you know, a repeat of what happened to her would happen to Katie. So it's like, you wouldn't have been able to do anything about this, don't blame yourself. But, you know, Katie, you know, because it's like, you know, even through everything, they obviously started off not liking each other, mainly because Katie is like, you know, all this crap that Julia kind of played a part in with the whole Morena situation. With Quentin kind of putting him in that like almost coma-like dream state, trapping him like that. Getting super pissed about him doing that, you know, doing that to her own quote-unquote best friend. So obviously she had a low opinion of Julia, but eventually during that whole situation with Richard and his group of people, they kind of bonded and everything and actually became friends. And it was like, even with it all said and done, even learning what she's learned, Katie hasn't turned her back on Julia like most people have. I mean, like legitimate, I am curious to know where Quentin stands on her now. Does he still care about her? Does she still feel the same way about Quentin? Like, are they still friends? Are they enemies? Or is he pissed at her because if it wasn't for her, Alice wouldn't be dead right now? You know, and then, you know, Julia, the same situation of being like, if it wasn't for them, Reynard would be dead right now, so. This is going to be interesting seeing that basically it seems like Julia, the only person in her corner is Katie. And that's what, like, it concerns me is, like, the fact is that Katie's going to get dragged into it. Like, obviously, Katie's like, oh, I'm in this for better or worse, but it's like, everyone that she's ever got mixed up with in this situation, like, she got Morena killed. Like I said, I mean, to be fair, like, I guess Morena's such a terrible person that, like, obviously Katie doesn't give a crap because it's like, oh, we're not going to bring her back, right? But it's like the necromancy spell is only temporary, so afterwards she go back to being dead. But at the same time, it's like, you know, Julia never really had any special attachment to Morena because Morena was just a means to an end to, you know, get more power and stuff like that. So it's going to be interesting going forward. I just hope, like, Katie doesn't get caught up in all of this. And obviously Katie's going to want her own revenge too because, like, she was hopeful with this whole situation. And so she was hoping for a goddess's help too. And then it turned out to be Reynard. So it's like for all the people that she was grouped together with and everything, all those people that died, like, obviously she wants revenge too. I just hope that Julia doesn't end up, you know, she doesn't end up becoming a pawn in all of this too. I mean, granted, the reason why the whole Morena situation happened mainly the way it did was because of Martin. So that Martin's been removed from the picture, maybe things will go a little bit smoothly. There won't be kind of any sacrifices. They ended up learning out from Morena. Well, two things. One, Morena was like freaking out. She's like, I don't want to go back to that place. I don't want to go back. But Julia's like, the fact is your time's up. Like, whatever the hell she is. Now, because something I'm going to quickly bring up is someone left a comment on last week's episode talking about the fact is that currently in a book. Now, I've heard different things. I've never read the books. I think I brought that up. I'm going to reiterate it here, but I've never read the books. I've heard from different people. I think in particular, I think I might have brought that up too. Like one time on like a table talk or something, Hank Green brought up the Magicians, that the fact is the show is different. Like apparently the places are the same, but the characters are different, which I've looked a little into that. Like, back when I was watching the first season, obviously a lot of the names are different. So I don't know if it's the characters themselves, but someone brought up the fact is that currently in the books, because I don't know if it's I don't know if the books are still an ongoing thing. Do let me know in the comments down below, but most likely by the time this is up, I've already looked it up myself. But nevertheless, They were talking about the fact is that they're trying to bring her back. Now, I don't know if it's specifically Alice or specifically, if there's an Alice in the books or whether it's like the character Alice is based on from the books. It's basically in that situation of like, oh, they're trying to bring her back because they've brought up the whole underworld thing, which I thought was kind of interesting because I'm like, dude, I'd be very interested to see what the magician's version of the underworld is, because obviously you see their interpretation of different things, but it'd be kind of interesting to see what their underworld is like, and especially kind of obviously expand, obviously because our main worlds are Fillory and Earth. I assume if we don't expand upon it going forward, because obviously the whole thing is to fix Fillory, because Fillory is kind of the centerfold of everything, but it's like it'd be kind of interesting to like, obviously we hear a little bit about different worlds, because like for instance Penny, like because his hands were so jacked up, ended up popping all over the place, and he ended up in 2 different places, I think he said, where there wasn't oxygen. So we hear about other worlds third-handedly, but we don't get to see them ourselves. So it's going to be interesting to see like whether that's going to be a future thing, once the whole Fillory situation is dealt with, or is it going to be a situation that we get to see later on in the season? I don't know, because Fillory only became a thing at the end of last season, so I'm thinking like this season is all going to be about obviously bouncing back and forth, but a big part of it's going to be Fillory because like, it's a world that we were introduced to, but we don't know that much about. So I feel like they'll probably spend the rest of the season like messing with it a little bit more, expanding upon it more. I actually thought that's where, maybe I was like, the point I was bringing up before, because I literally lost track of where I was going with that for a moment, was like, maybe that's where Morena was, or maybe something like it. Like, I'd assume it was more, like, because different things have its own interpretations of death, and like, and some things, one particular show in particular is, Torchwood, where basically in Torchwood, their version of death was like, oh yeah, once you die, it's nothing but darkness. There's no like heaven or hell, like there's just darkness. And maybe that's where Morena was, or maybe she was legitimately in hell because she was just maybe possibly a terrible person. Who's to say? Maybe that'd be something we'll find out later. Maybe it won't be. Maybe it's something that might never be touched on again. I get the feeling like they brought it up, and I feel like they'll eventually elaborate on it. But I thought that was actually where Quentin's story was going to go, but I'll kind of get to that in a second. But we end up finding out that there's someone who has a connection to Reynard, that the person who originally banished him was some lady from 40 years ago. So Julia and Katie have to track that person down. That's their only way of dealing with Reynard, because the only person strong enough to deal with Reynard, was Martin. And other than that, the only other person that would be able to deal with him would have been Alice, but that had to be a souped up Alice, but now she's dealt with this life. And Ember or Umber, whatever the case may be, is gone, and no one knows where the hell they are. Hence, I also love the fact is that they were talking about, yeah, we tried dealing with the whole Umber's like shit situation. Yeah, that's happening to a certain degree, but it's like the Springwell is super messed up because of that. It's like obviously he had good intentions, but still that's kind of, Springwell is super effed up, and it's going to take a while to kind of fix it. It's slowly trying to fix itself, but it's still not going to be enough to stop like the slow like demise of magic, essentially. But going to the other side of things, you had that situation where Penny was like, okay, Quentin, I need you to cut off my hands because I just try to kill myself in my sleep. My hands try to strangle me. And he had, like, Penny got super drunk, and Quentin's about to cut off his hand, but like, man, I can't. I don't like blood. He's like, who the hell likes blood? He's like, oh, man, stop being such a punk. Start talking all this crap. And then, like, Quentin just went, bam. And he's like, I can feel it. I can feel it. And then, like, what I love is the fact is it wasn't like one extra swing or two extra swings. It was like multiple swings, like, Quentin just kept going bam, 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 bam. Just, I guess, because he just wasn't either cutting deep enough or he kept missing, just cutting off his hands. But together, like him and Quentin start chasing down the lady known as the White Lady. This is the lady that's been in the creature that's been in a lot of the promotional pictures and posters for it. The kind of gray skin creature with horns, and it's like, oh, I didn't expect that to be such a thing. Apparently it's like a very powerful creature that basically you catch it, it will grant you whatever wish. And the point is like, hey, Quentin's want to get Alice back, and then Penny wants to get his hands back. Now the whole situation I was like, okay, I'll get to it in a second. It's like, that's where I thought Quentin's story was going to go. Like, oh, we're going to travel to the underworld to get Alice back. Granted, that might be something that goes for, because it's kind of hinted at, because the White Lady is like, the fact is that they cannot enter that veil. They can't break through that veil. There's no way to bring Alice back. It's like, even through all that they went through, they couldn't bring Alice back. So, which I'll kind of get to in a second. But the whole point was like they had to go through a forest because it's called the Flying Forest. And at first they're like, and then you have Penny be like, why aren't any of the damn trees flying? It's like, oh yeah, the fact is they only do that during like certain points and times and stuff like that. And then it hits them. It's like, oh, it's called the Flying Forest because at the time the Chaplins came here, they were super high as hell and they actually thought the trees were flying. They were blitzed out of their damn minds. So it gets you super high and makes you forget everything. They were even to the point that they were forgetting each other's names, and it's like forgetting what they were there for and who they like, what they are. It's like, maybe I'm I forgot what the hell it was Quentin called himself, and Penny is like, and Penny says manservant. He's like, how am I your manservant? What kind of effing manservant has no effing hands? But what I thought, like, the reason why I brought that up, I mean, obviously because it's part of the story, but I thought was very interesting is like when you think about it, like it was brought up last season that, something that, when he was writing the book, obviously the next Fillory book, Quentin brought up the fact is that that part of Fillory's air is like, I think it was like 0.2% opium, so it gets you a little high to make you love it. And it's like on top of that, you have these trees that get you high. It's like Fillory is just goes out of its way to make you high, doesn't it? So that was kind of interesting. But like I said, whether that whole situation with Alice is completely dealt with, and the fact is that they're not going to go to the underworld type of situation and bring her back, because it seems like the Whiteley was like, yo, I'm not going to break through that barrier. Like no other powerful creature is going to do that because it's something that shouldn't be meddled with, because I'm sure that's going to be kind of a catastrophe on its own, which I appreciate. Another thing about the White Lady is she's kind of a smart ass. He's like, oh, the fact is, this is my arrow. She's like, well, no, duh, it's your damn arrow. Just, what the hell do you want, you idiot? Like, she's kind of a bit of a smart ass, and I appreciate that. Like, nothing in Fillory is as it was, like, it's like, oh, it's magical and it's mystical. Obviously, magical and mystical, but not to like that family, like, oh, like she's so wise and powerful and kind or something like that. Oh, you caught me, I'll grant your every wish. It's like, you caught me, now what the F is your wish so you can leave me the hell alone? It's like, she's like, literally tell me what the hell you want. I can't bring Alice back. You must want something else, because I literally won't be able to concentrate or go to sleep until I get this done for you. So tell me what the hell you want. Obviously, she gave Penny back his hands, which it means like literally growing the bat. We ended up finding out about that dude too. What's his name? The River Watcher. Apparently he's kind of a big deal to even the Doctor, which I can't remember the actor's name, but he's been in plenty enough stuff. He was literally on the, it's kind of interesting because I'm covering the 100 later on, which is once again one of those interesting things because I actually recorded that before I recorded this. So it's just, I'm not about to get into it again. You know how I am about recording weird things out of order. Nevertheless, he was on the 100 last season. His character ended up getting killed off. He played Sinclair. But I've seen him in stuff. It's just like, oh, it's you. Even he was like, yo, I'm not about to touch your hands, Penny. The Watcher, he's going to be super pissed. I don't want to take the chance a curse might fly to me. And the entire time he's talking to Penny, and Penny's like, what the hell are you shitting while you're talking to me? And then like the lady comes over and sweeps it up, and he's like, you're welcome. And just kind of like, I don't know. Centaur Doctor. Okay. Just stepping up more and more about the whole like weirdness that is Fillory. It's literally like a fairy tale land hopped up on drugs and just, it's like the real, it's like hearing the fairy tale versions of stories and then hearing like the original grim versions of them. It's like, it's literally that same thing. But Quentin was just like, yeah, send me back home. So the thing is, I'm wondering, because basically even, the White Lady was like, yeah, the fact is I could remove all your memories of Alice, but it's a good thing that you were like, no, because you're smarter than I give you credit for. Because the fact is that no matter what, it might heal his heart now, but eventually he'd go back to being sad anyway, because that part of it, that he would never be able to feel that emptiness in his heart that he feels now. Even with everything, he's got everything he's ever wanted. He's got magic. He's at Breakbills. He's in Fillory, the place he's dreamed about and read about ever since he was a little kid. And it's just, but even with magic, the thing he's always loved and adored and believed in, it still can't help him get what he wanted. The whole situation with his dad, which we still haven't gone back to, which, I mean, maybe, I don't know if that's a storyline that they're going to touch on or not, whether that was just kind of a one-off thing. But I can't even bring Alice back. It's like, what the hell is magic good for? Because, the whole point is, like, he brought up last season, like, what is magic? What's the point of magic if you can't freaking do what you want to do with. Can't do anything with it. Magic's supposed to be like unlimited possibilities, and it's like apparently that's not the case. It's unlimited possibilities with an asterisk beside it. Under certain conditions, not everything can be gained through magic. So. I don't know whether it's a situation because he's back home and he's away from Fillory, and it's like I don't know whether that's like he's kind of given up on Fillory because it's like, oh, he's a king and everything and it's the world he loves, but it's kind of like screw Fillory because it's like the woman he loves is gone. Whether that means he'll go back to break bills, I don't know. Maybe he completely drops off. Maybe he doesn't give a crap about magic anymore. We'll just have to see. I mean, there's so many ways different directions that could go. Because they brought up the whole thing about the reason why Elliot's trying to take things a little more seriously is the fact is that there's a power vacuum because now Ember, is gone. Now that Beast is gone too. It's like there's no one to kind of keep the power in balance. And obviously there's a lot of stuff across the kingdom, certain people invading, stuff like that. So one thing I didn't bring up earlier that, at least I don't think I did, was the whole Javier and Elliot situation. I met the new guy, Javier, and at the same time, his mind was bouncing back and forth between him and Fillory having sex with Finn. God, I'm tired. Sorry. And having sex with Elliot. I mean, with Javier. God, I'm messing up so hard. I'm so sorry. Literally, that reminded me of some Sense8 stuff. Once again, like, if you have not watched Sense8, I highly recommend you check it out. That, like, if you watch Sense8, you'll kind of get what I mean by, like, that heavily reminded me of just kind of, like, how that whole scene went down. So that's just, I don't know, I just kind of want to tack that on in. Overall, very good episode. Like I said, it's still a somber episode just because it makes you remember the whole Alice situation. I was hoping that there'd be a way to kind of bring her back. Well, that might be something that gets trailed on later on, especially if it's a situation where it's like something similar like that is only being brought up in the books. At the same time, it's like, obviously the worlds are the same. The stories are probably a little different because the characters are different. Maybe the stories are exactly the same. But the fact of the matter is, it's probably a situation where it's like, it's pulling from certain parts of the books and certain books because I know it's not just like one book. I do know that there are multiple books within the series, but like I said, I don't know if it's still an ongoing series. I assume it is, but I could be wrong. So anyway, very interested to find out what happens next episode. And now moving on to this week's episode of The 100. So in this episode, a lot of things went down. Obviously, the situation is getting worse because we end up seeing that Luna, as well as some of her surviving people, show up at Arcadia. Turns out that they have acute radiation poisoning. Now, basically, Raven does a little calculations. Turns out, they don't actually have 6 months because things are very complicated. And so what was originally 6 months is now 2 months until they're all wiped out from the radiation. So because it's not just stopping with them. Apparently, there's a whole situation, like, apparently even the fish are dying. So, like, it hit the place where Luna and her people were at fast, and now it's slowly spreading. It's not even slowly, it's quickly spreading, and now it's going to hit them all within the next 2 months. So it kicks the timetable up even more, which the whole situation is already very stressful enough, considering the whole fact is that they don't even have the supplies they needed because they were supposed to get the whole thing last episode to help sustain the arc a little bit more so that like more people could survive in there. But with the way conditions are now without that, I think the whole point was kind of like a water filtration system. I don't know if exactly that's what it was, but that was a system for basically getting proper and clean water. Without that, like the amount of people that can be fit in there obviously is 100 and no more than that. So like I said, that kind of got brought up at the end of the episode, and I was kind of surprised at the beginning. I was like, Raven's having a casual conversation with Bellamy and Clark. She's not pissed anymore that quickly. Chance. I was like, no, never mind. She's still pissed because she's like basically saying Clark has to write down the list of who are going to be the 100 people that survive this. Is kind of like, she's like, the fact is that you have to make this decision because she's like, you're used to making this decision to decide who lives and who dies. Which, at that same time, is kind of like, you could argue that could be about so much. That could be about Mount Weather. That could be about their current situation because she lied about the whole situation that everyone would survive. But even though it's like, you made that decision on your own. It's like, you weren't supposed to kind of say something like that, giving people false hope. But more so than anything, I interpret that as like the whole Mount Weather situation. So that's something that, hence why she got named Juanita in the first place. It's kind of like, that's something she's always going to carry with her, just like the whole Bellamy situation last season. He has to always carry that too, which kind of came up in conversation, but I'll get to that in a little bit. The thing in this circumstance is just kind of like they're running out of time, like I say, even more time. And the sad thing is it puts Raven in a very bad position. Raven has to, especially in this episode, she seems very distant and cold-hearted. The fact is that Abby's like, yo, give us some of the radiation pills because like we could use this on the kids and stuff. Luna and her people are dying, and Raven's like, the fact is, can you guarantee me they'll be fine? She's like, wait, what? So the fact is, we need that medicine for ourselves. The fact of the matter is, we've got less time now, too. So it's like, we're trying to get all these repairs done in time, which we most likely won't be able to. And on top of that, you want to use our medicine on people that are already going to die. Obviously, didn't really go to that necessarily extent, but it's like, she's like, guarantee me that they can be saved and we can do it. Otherwise, we'd be wasting supplies that could be used to save us. It's like, they're kind of in a situation where they're already screwed. We're not. So, but then, Abby was like, basically, it's not a radiation that's killing them. If you deciding to do this, it's you doing that. And it breaks your heart because it's like Raven's in a tough position because she has to make the decisions because she's the one who's put in charge about rationing everything, the food, water, whatever the case may be, to make sure that they all survive. So obviously she seems very cold-hearted, but she's being very practical about the situation. That's a circumstance no one wants to be in. Her situation and Clark's situation, I would never want to be in that position. I couldn't stress that enough last episode, how I do not envy Clark. Don't envy Raven one bit either, because it's like, and obviously you see like she cries because of it, because it hurts her that, it's like, she's just doing what's best for their people. It's like, it's not a situation like she hates Luna and her people, but at the same time, it's like, this is like, if she doesn't do this, like, there won't be anyone left, even if, they're still around before the 2 months is ready. Like, even if things go slightly according to plan, if they don't have the medication needed, they won't be able to keep each other, like, themselves alive, because the medication needs to be applied within pretty quickly of getting radiation sickness. But these people have been sick for a while, so. But then you have the surprise of Murphy, because Murphy popped up. Because originally he was going to come there to steal supplies, but then it turns out it's like he overhears this cold conversation, and Murphy does what Murphy has always done. And he ends up stealing the pills and giving them to Abby, and Abby's like, wait, how did you? She's like, never mind. And they end up giving it to the little girl, because it's like, hey, if it works on the little girl, then they can make sure they see results. It's like, okay, we can test and run everyone else too. And even her assistant and everything's just kind of like, man, John's dad got floated for, doing the same thing, stealing medicine to save John's life, which I'm sure that came up before, but it's been such a while, I completely forgot about it, if that did come up at all. But I get the feeling that probably did. And he was like, oh, I can't believe he had it in him. And then Abby turns to him and smiles. It's like, I knew it. And that's the thing about Murphy that's always, subsequently since the first season, that's always blown my mind about Murphy, is that when the time comes for it, like, obviously Murphy can seem very selfish, and he was seen as very as the antagonist, especially in the beginning when it was like him and Bellamy kind of running things. But when it was all said and done, like, Murphy has come around to be that person that you can rely on. When it's going gets tough, he's there to help. Because even under those circumstances, he was still there helping. It's like he didn't have to do that situation. He could have just stolen what he wanted from Raven and then bounced. But the fact is, he helped out Abby. Obviously, later on, there's a whole situation with Amori where he's kind of like, oh yeah, we just earn our keep and we need to be helping out, Arcadia, because it's like, he's like, oh, I've already gotten in good with Abby. Obviously, there's that survival instinct he has, but at the same time, like, at the end of it all, I think he does have a good heart, especially when it comes, because it's not even just about keeping himself alive. It comes down to keeping Mori alive too, because he legitimately cares for her. Because the whole reason he was back in Arcadia is because he had to get away from her because they couldn't get food and whatnot. Because mainly because food's all dying from the radiation. Because neither one of them knew about that. He would have known about it a little sooner if he had went back, if he had stuck around long enough to figure this whole, be there to listen about this whole circumstance. But obviously, like I said, it's a situation where it's like give and take with, like, I feel like Murphy lately, subsequently since getting trouble back in, what was that? I think roughly around season 2, like season 1 and season 2, obviously there was some rocky parts, but subsequently since then, I feel like he's really kind of stepped up and kind of played his part. Obviously, like I said, it's obviously he's got his own selfish desires at the same time, but who cares? At the very end of it, at least he's helping. Once again, at least you can argue, at least he's not Jasper, which I cannot stress that enough. Which we didn't get any of Jasper this episode, but it's just like, that's going to be a thing, because it subsequently was a thing all through last season, and it's definitely going to continue to be one. I just don't know how he's going to do it yet, but I brought it up before. I know Jasper's going to impede this some shape or form. But another thing in this episode was the whole situation with Thelonious. He basically was trying. He's not an idiot. He figured this out pretty quickly. He's like, I know this can only hold 100 people. He's like, you're forgetting I am an engineer. Like, I may have been the chancellor, but I was still an engineer before that, and I'm pretty good at my job. So I know how this thing works. It can only hold 100 people. So basically, there was a group / cult called Second Dawn way back in the day, before things really went down, before Earth ended up in this situation that it currently is in. This guy basically got a group together, and he was basically built a bomb shelter. Basically, he took a lot of the funds he had acquired from it and to build upon that shelter. That's what Thelonious wanted to figure out, because it's like, hey, maybe we can find a way where no one has to be sacrificed, because at the end of the day, if this doesn't work out, not even talking about the outside people, like the grounders and stuff, the coalition in particular, even outside of that, when you take just within Arcadia, there will be 400 people that would have to die if this doesn't work out, which, they end up tracking it down because Thelonious wasn't sure if it existed, because it was one of the potential places that, he was going to send the 100 to, because it's kind of like, but he knew all the other facilities were compromised. This was one day he wasn't 100% sure if he knew it existed or not. He had found a decent location, but he wasn't 100% sure if it was real or not. So him, Clark, and Bellamy went to go check it out. Turns out it is a real place. Sadly, all those code people who did seal themselves in are dead because the radiation still got to them, so it's not even a viable option. So they're back to square one. I mean, the whole conversation came up between Thelonious and Bellamy about the whole redemption situation, because it's like they're both seeking redemption, which Bellamy's like, you better hope there's no hell for your sake, because if there is one, I'll be seeing you there. And he's like, because he basically made Bellamy think, he's like, what did you do all of it for? It was all for your people, right? And as long as it was for that reason, and you keep reminding yourself if it was for that reason, then there is almost going as far as being like, there is at least some honor in it. You can't 100% bag on yourself, because the fact is, in the long run, you were doing it for your people, and you can't be faulted for that, which, I mean, arguably, you can be faulted for, like, what he was a part of last season. But Jaha brought up also this thing is like, well, how many lives do you have to save before you're able to kind of redeem yourself? And there was no answer to that, because they're really, I mean, how more so than anything, it's forgive yourself. Because out of anything, I don't think it's a situation where Bellamy's like, he's wanting other people. I'm sure if anyone's forgiveness he would want is Octavia's, but like I said, things are as the way they are. But even then, like, we haven't really seen them have much interactions, because the interactions they've had have been other people around too. And it's been a while, so I don't really remember if their relationship actually got better at nearing the end of season 3. I think it got a little better, but I'm sure it's still a little rocky. They're not nearly as tight as they used to be. I mean, subsequently, like, Pike did kill the man that she loves, and, she feels like, I mean, she was connected to Tree Crew and everything, especially Indra and everything, which I'm definitely going to get to all that soon enough, but it's like all that plays out in a certain way, and it's like that after everything that he's kind of done last season, it's like it's going to be hard for her to forgive, not just the Lincoln situation, but other people from Tree Crew that he killed, just the whole thing. But speaking about kind of going back to it, like the fact is that they're at square one. At first, Raven came in mad because she found out about Murphy stealing and everything, and then found out the pills didn't work. They only used like a small 1 dose of the pills, but it wasn't enough to save the little girl, so there was no hope for everyone else. Everyone else died. I'll kind of get to that in a second, but it's like, when seeing that little girl die broke Raven's heart. Like I said, she's forced to make those hard decisions, but she didn't want the circumstances to play out like that, but it made it a little more real, because now she's seeing the way that it's like, this is a little girl that died. It's not like some adult, it isn't some teenager, it's like a little girl that died, and it's like the way she died will be the same fate that her and everyone else around her will kind of have to suffer. So I was thinking what was going to happen is that Clark would write the list, which she did, but I thought she was going to hand it to Raven, or Raven's going to be like, no, we're not going to write that. Don't need that list. What we're going to do is we're going to find a different way, which that conversation never came up. So it's like Raven's still in that position where it's like, yes, she's sad, but at the same time, she knows, like, I have a job to do. We all have a job to do. We need to do this, like, because Clark didn't want to write the list, but she did. because Bellamy was like, oh, and put number 100. You know who it is. That either you write it or I do. And then he wrote her name. She's like, so what do I do? He's like, put the list up. And what you do is we keep finding a way and hope that we don't need it. And it's like, you're still hopeful. He's like, we're still alive, aren't we? So as long as we're breathing, we keep going and trying to find a better way, which I'm always waiting for the other side of it, like the other shoe to drop, metaphorically speaking, because I'm sure that things aren't going to be that easy in the sense of like, that's just like, oh, she puts that list away. I'm sure that's going to come up. Maybe it's a Jasper thing. Maybe it's someone else stumbling upon it. But like, someone's going to be like, oh, what's up with this list? Oh, it's 100% BS. Not all of us can be saved. Only 100 people can be saved. And it turns into a riot situation. Like I said, more so than anyone, especially now that I've thrown Jasper's name into the gauntlet, I'm like, it has to be him. But, and it turns out, it seems that Luna is going to be a piece of the key of finding out like how to save everyone, because obviously Luna's surviving just this acute amount. I mean, granted, this is like a small amount of radiation that is to come. Like obviously the radiation that's going to be coming is going to hit her even harder. So even in her current state, she probably won't be able to survive it. But maybe she will be able to. But at the very least, it'll, give them a little more hope and give them another option going forward. That basically the point is to kind of make everyone's body a little more resilient to the radiation, so that this way I think it's like they'll have more time. So even when the radiation is sweeping in, at least initially it won't kill them, and get a little more time to work on an arc, or at least some cure, or at least maybe some permanent cure. Because it's like obviously the Sky Crew has, immunity to radiation, and to some extent the Grounders have been, just because of a combination of different things. Obviously, because that was kind of the whole situation with Mount Weather, because they needed a cure for radiation, because they couldn't survive in the radiation because they had been sealed away the entire time. Whereas the people, Sky Crew, was out in space, slowly getting like their bodies were getting accumulated to the radiation over the 100 years they were out there in space. But another side of this episode was the whole situation with the flame. It seems that the flame was stolen from Rowan, which then he calls upon Octavia, to retrieve it. He even refers to her as Sky Ripper, because apparently that's her new nickname, because she's kind of a little bloodthirsty now. Which I'll say, like, we've seen more and more of, because obviously, like, Octavia wasn't even always like this when she was with Tree Crew, in particular Indra, but it seems like since last season, her bloodlust has kind of increased, especially as we saw, like, she killed that ambassador last episode like it was nothing. Like, she didn't bat an eye. She didn't feel any remorse for it. I guess because in her mind, it's like, it's for the greater good. It's like, because he jeopardized Rowan, which jeopardizes our whole situation, and kind of keep it in peace till long enough that we can all find a situation around this whole radiation situation. And you had a moment where Indra was looking at her walking away. The fact is that Octavia was so quick to take this job of like, oh, find the person that stole the flame, kill them, and take it back, essentially. Because at first he's kind of like, oh, it's the Flame Keeper, which I'll get to that soon enough. But part of me wonders, is it a situation where where Indra's almost disappointed, because obviously it kind of comes up that basically, well, I'll get into it. The Flame Keeper it turns out to be her daughter. Is it Gia or Gaia? You know how terrible I am with names, with this terrible memory of mine. But nevertheless, her daughter is the Flame Keeper. Her daughter definitely only recently returned home. Essentially, she left. Like, Indra was not. It's kind of a situation where it's like, oh, I didn't want you for this path. It's like Indra wanted her to be here, by her side, become a fierce warrior that would eventually lead an army of her own. But it's like, obviously, her daughter had a different path in mind. And it's like, to her, she's like, Mom, you've turned your back on everything. The fact is that you're letting someone from the Ice Nation become the king. Obviously, she doesn't know the whole circumstance. And Indra's like, child, shut up, because you don't know exactly what you're talking about. You don't know all the ins and outs of this situation. Things are a lot more different. I'm surprised they didn't explain everything to her, but at the same time, maybe they feel like they couldn't. Because to her, she's like, the fact of the matter is, like, the flame needs to be kept safe until it can be passed on to someone. I mean, as we see, because I was wondering about that. I was like, so I've already figured, I was like, Luna must survive this or somehow. That's why I was thinking, like, oh, they saved Luna's life. Medicine saves everyone. That's why I was kind of surprised when we find out the little girl died. Because I was like, oh, that means everyone else is screwed. But now, obviously, Luna's still alive. because she is the one that kind of supposed to take the flame next. And Luna didn't take it last season, but now she might not have a choice seeing what's going forward. It's like she needs to take charge to be the one to kind of rightfully take the throne and not rule under falsehood like Rowan, because Rowan being king is just long enough to kind of help mediate obviously the current situation. So, but the thing is, like, obviously when Indra looks at Octavia, I do think she kind of looks more so at the daughter that it's probably not a situation like, oh, this is the daughter I never had. Octavia is everything that my daughter wasn't. She's the daughter I can be proud of. I think it's a circumstance when she looks at Octavia, it's probably a constant reminder that her daughter isn't around. Like, probably because the need to kind of prove herself, the fact that she's very stubborn and outgoing, probably made, like, seeing Octavia like that probably reminded her of a lot of her daughters. So, and obviously they have a very strenuous relationship to the point that, like, Indra doesn't even really want to talk to her, but Octavia's like, talk to her. The fact of the matter is, because Octavia and Bellamy don't have their family anymore, because of the fact is that things playing out. Obviously their parents got spaced because the fact is obviously having two of them, but also because of just that's how it worked on the arc and everything. So it's like she never really got to keep her family in her life, and it's like, Indra, you have the opportunity, so take this opportunity. Because she is your daughter and everything. Because in some way, you do see that she does want to do anything. She wants to make her mom proud. But the point I was making earlier was the fact is that, like, she has a very strong belief in the old faith of, like, oh, this is the way things are. And it's like, oh, the fact is that Indra is so willing to serve Rowan and everything. It's like, oh, the fact is you betray everything that we've ever stood for, our traditions and stuff like that. So because I was thinking the person who ended up stealing, I was like, oh, obviously the choice has got to be Ilian, but obviously it turns out it was Indra's daughter. But Ilian has been going around destroying all the technology. He even at one point destroys, quote unquote, the flame, because he sees it as the last piece of technology, even though it's part of their tradition and stuff like that. It's still a part of the technology of what allowed Allie to kind of take control last season, which is, to be fair, that piece right there is what protected you. So made it so that Clark was able to destroy Allie. So it's like, you would think, for Ilian, it's a sense of like all technology has to be destroyed, because the fact is that is, because he can't have anything, possibly bringing Allie back or recreating a similar circumstance to Allie where a lot of people get hurt. So, but what threw me for a loop even more so, because Octavia was trying to keep Indra's daughter out of the conversation of like, oh, that your flame, that your flame keeper is the one who actually stole it from you. Rowan, Octavia brings him because it was a fake, the fake one that Indra's daughter wore around her neck that was smashed, and it's like, let her keep the real flame, and then it's like, she'll present it to Rowan and be like, oh yeah, it was smashed. And he's like, all right, well, we're going to have to keep up these pretenses that if anyone kind of gets in the way, like kind of asks too many questions, you'll have to be my blade and kind of slice through them and everything to kind of shut them. This whole Clark kind of fixes his circumstance, the situation before you have to do that, which Octavia is, like I said, once again, kind of willing to be that way if she needs to be. Kind of going back to it, I kind of diverted away from her, but I think also there's a part of Indra that's disappointed because she probably blames herself, because it's like her training and her tough love type of situation created Octavia to be who she is now, that like she is so bloodthirsty, because it's like she already had to she had to taste the revenge. Killing Pike the way she did wasn't like, oh, it wasn't like it was a last resort or something like that. It's like, no, after what she lost, she got revenge. But I think at the same time, it's a situation where it didn't fill that hole in her heart, that she's still angry, that she's still pissed. And I'm thinking that maybe doing this, being a blade is her way of dealing with her anger and her pain. She needs to divert it somewhere. And so she found a more quote unquote constructive way of dealing with it. So, that's how I see it. Like I said, like the whole Indra situation could be either or, like how she's seeing it. So very interesting developments. It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out going forward. The whole Luna situation, as well as, like I said, I feel like they're setting Ilian up to be a bit thing too, that maybe his need to destroy technology may screw this whole situation up. It might go back to a situation where it's like technically everyone should know about this. Like I said, the group of people that knows about this is slowly expanding. Obviously everyone on Arcadia, but very few people in the coalition know about it. Only people that know are Rowan and Echo and Indra. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.